Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Score Study video series for the 4 Minutes from Midnight virtual band project. I'm Yoshio Yamashita. I am the director for the virtual band, and I'm also the composer of the symphony 4 Minutes from Midnight. This video is going to do a brief overview and analysis of the 3 clarinet parts for the symphony. The bass clarinet part is included in the video for low reeds. So if you play the bass clarinet part, your part will not be included in this video. It is in the video, again, labeled low reeds. So let's begin here with the short solo in the sostenuto portion of the symphony, the opening. This is just a very mysterioso type of feeling here in the beginning. Let's rewind the score to the beginning and look at just kind of the general context. So we open with this 4-note horn solo, and then the clarinet solo enters, then the third horn, then the tuba plus timpani, and then the reprise of that motive in the first horn, and then the forte piano into rehearsal A. If you're interested in looking at that in a little closer detail and where it's not all spread out over a full score, I highly suggest you go watch the condensed score video, which uses this condensed score, which is out and available on the YouTube channel for the project. Let's begin by looking at rehearsal A. First clarinet, you're doubling these runs with the piccolo and the first alto saxophone, as you can see here. So piccolo, B flat clarinet 1, an octave below that, and then alto saxophone 1, an octave below that. Second and third clarinets, you're in the same boat as the oboes and the second alto saxophone. Like I said to the oboes in an earlier video, please differentiate between the forte and the fortissimo here. The fortissimo here is actually the occurrence of a motif, which we discuss in score study video number 4, which is themes part 2. So if you are interested in learning a little more about that, please go watch that if you haven't already. I'm going to make a number of references to previous score study videos, especially concerning themes, to try to cut down on the amount of time for this video, as they generally run around 20 or 25 minutes to begin with. I don't want them to be 45 minutes or an hour long. Another thing to watch out for is to differentiate between your quarter note triplets and, say, your eighth note triplets. The quarter note triplets are fairly slow. Now, do note that this is at 167 beats a minute, so it isn't a slow tempo. But the quarter note triplets are probably going to be slower than you think they are. So practice slowly and with a metronome at first, then bring it up to tempo. The same principle applies here at letter B. Practice slowly with the metronome at first. Mark all your accidentals carefully. There are 2 sharps in the key signature. However, there are multiple places where you have accidentals that are not in the key signature, and sometimes multiple accidentals affecting the same note within a measure. For example, here in the third clarinet part, this is at letter B. You'll notice there is an A sharp here, and then there is an A natural immediately following. Please pay attention to these and mark them carefully and appropriately as you see fit. Near the end of letter B, you'll join with the rest of the woodwinds in this triplet figure. There's an abrupt cutoff at letter C. So crescendo from the end of B into C, but there is no downbeat in C. Letter D introduces a chorale that we discuss in score study video number 3. This is the first occurrence of this chorale. It's actually the chorale that comprises the finale of the piece at the end of part 2, which we'll discuss later. Notice that we have legato markings on every note. What I want you to think about while you're playing this particular excerpt from the piece is kind of a dolce espressivo character, very lyrical, singing the notes with some separation so we can tell that they aren't all slurred together, but a rather plaintive character there. Then you have a whole bunch of rest. Please make sure to count all your rests correctly. You have a couple of time changes. And the pulse shifts from quarter notes to half notes here. At letter F, we switch back to a quarter note pulse. First clarinets have this 2 solo or 4 soli divisi. I believe we have 2 solo here. Player 1 takes all of the notes that are stems up. Player 2 takes all the notes that are stems down. That applies also to this measure, the fourth measure. After F, where it's player 1 for beats 1 and 2, player 2 for beat 3, and player 1 for beat 4, and then tutti here. Second clarinets, make sure you're subdividing the eighth notes securely, especially in this last measure, bar number 52. The first clarinets, as well as the flutes and alto saxophones, have this figure in which beat 4 is subdivided into a triplet, not a dotted 8th 16th as it might seem when you're listening to it. That means this triplet figure will not line up with the eighth notes that you have written in your part. Please observe this and play metronomically eighth notes, not triplets or dotted 8th 16ths or something in between. Essentially, your last eighth note will not line up with the end of the eighth note triplet here. Moving on to letter G, I'm going to skip the half notes and move on to the fives. One of the principal problems with fivelets and sevens and nines and odd numbered triplets is people don't subdivide them. You know, we're all taught to subdivide eighth notes, 16th notes, triplets, most of us sextuplets, and we're generally taught words or syllables to subdivide with. So 16th notes, most of us subdivide 1 E and 2 E and so on and so forth. One of the problems that comes up with not subdividing these odd numbered tuplets is that we rush through them, or we play them unevenly, or both. And so the easy solution to both of those problems is to find a word or a set of syllables that you can subdivide odd numbered tuplets with. Some suggestions for the fives here would be university or geophysical, or any other word that has 5 syllables naturally. And then, of course, for sevens, any word or phrase that has 7 syllables, so on and so forth. Again, slow practice benefits you here more than anything. Fives are not natural because they're not divisible by 2 like 8th notes or 16th notes or even 32nd notes are. And so we tend to just hope we get them on time, which does not work most of the time. Notice here that first clarinet has a triplet-based rhythm against the second and third clarinets 5-based rhythm. So those should not line up. First clarinet, this fanfare type figure you have with the oboes here and the first bassoon. Make sure you're following those accents appropriately, even though you're only marked at piano. At letter H, make sure you're counting your rest appropriately. There's a lot of meter changes, so mark those if you need to. One of the things I do is write 3 above 3, 4, 4 above 4, 4, so on and so forth. Through letter I and letter J, just rest. At letter K, first clarinet, even though your line moves up and then down, and we generally try to phrase dynamics with the general shape of the phrase, meaning if the notes go up, crescendo, if the notes go down, decrescendo. However, What we want right here is a crescendo from pianissimo to piano, just a slight crescendo, and then some slight separation on the notes, lightly tongued, not staccato. Second and third clarinet, just nice legato playing here. First clarinet, a little more separation. Second clarinet follows suit to what first clarinet did here, whatever first clarinets do before, since you have the same figure, phrase the same way. Again, the issue first clarinets with the triplet figure. Make sure to differentiate this triplet figure from the dotted 8th, 16th that follows. They are not the same thing. Letter L is the principal theme of the second movement, which we discuss in score study video number 4. If you're interested in that, please go check that out. Notice this is marked mezzo piano, and then letter M is forte. However, there's no crescendo leading into M. This is purposeful. What I've done at this particular point is an orchestrated crescendo in which we add more instruments in the bar before M, and we crescendo the bass voices. So the whole ensemble grows louder because there's a larger density of sound coming out of the ensemble. So we don't need to write a crescendo in every single part. At letter M, we start out with the melody. First clarinet moves to a descant line on beat 4 here in the third bar after M. And then we have an orchestrated decrescendo. See second clarinet, you've dropped out here 2 bars before letter N. And then third clarinet has fewer notes leading up to letter N. Again, letter O is a recap of what happens at letter L. It's just transposed into concert E flat major / C minor, which would be your F major, D minor. Again, we cover that in score study video number 4. Letter P is a recap of what happens at L and what happens at O, except it's in A minor / C major in concert pitch, which is B minor / D major for you. Again, we cover that in score study number 4. And then a whole bunch of rest leading into the flute solo at R. You'll hear the flute solo's pickups are 2 half notes in the bar before R. So let's look at that very quickly. Here's 2 bars before R. Notice the figuration here that every 8th note is accounted for. So clarinet 3 and lower divisi clarinet 2 have the downbeat. The and of 1 is in clarinet 2. Beat 2 is in clarinet 1, and then the and of 2. This part's mirrored in the vibraphone part, which simply has the same thing with pedal. So we have that sustained effect through the bar. And what you're imitating here is a harp or piano with pedal or vibraphone with pedal or any kind of sustaining instrument there. So you're continuing that pattern. First clarinet joins the flute at bar 170. Be mindful that this is a 2-player soli. So though it's marked mezzo piano, first of all, you don't want to cover up the flute. But second of all, you want to balance the flute because it's 2 players against 1 flute soloist. So please be mindful of that. And that solo with flute 1 goes up until the tutti at beat 4 before letter S. Second and third clarinet, you continue this imitation of a harp or piano or vibraphone, whichever you'd prefer to imagine, up until letter S. At letter S, first and second clarinet have melody harmony, and third clarinet has this kind of motor. The way that figure works is third clarinets along with third trumpet and the lower two saxophones, alto 2 and tenor, are playing off beats. The trombones have downbeats. So what you're essentially creating is this downbeat, upbeat kind of motor during this melodic line. So let's play this with just the clarinets, and then we'll look at it in context. Now let's look at it in context. So what you'll notice here is at the A tempo, there's mostly a reprise of that theme that comes in at S and also is introduced by the flute solo at letter R. There's a noticeable difference here at the A tempo. The first phrase or the first set of phrases at letter S, you can divide into 4 measure phrases, meaning that you can divide it into this 4 measure phrase, and then this 4 measure phrase. And then this measure serves as an augmented pickup. However, you'll notice that if we try to break this into 4 measure phrases, you end up breaking the tie here and the longer slur. So what you need to do here is envision this as one larger 8-bar phrase or sentence. Also, I want to very quickly mention third clarinet here. This mezzo forte to mezzo forte crescendo is not a printing mistake. What you are intended to do here is crescendo from mezzo forte up to mezzo forte forte, and then subito mezzo forte at the A tempo. At the poco meno, this solo or soli, I believe I've assigned it as a solo. Very plaintive, again, singingly, and just as one continuous phrase. I'd prefer this to be played without breath, although if you need to sneak a breath in there, that's fine. And then obviously these 8th notes just smooth, but very quiet. That's the end of the analysis for part 1. If you're planning on watching this in 2 parts, you can pause the video here and then resume from here when you continue watching. Otherwise, we're going to move on to part 2. Part 2 opens up with something I call kind of a second cataclysm. If you think of the opening of part 1 as a cataclysm with all of the runs and trills and just general chaos, this is a little more organized chaos in that it's a little more harmonically organized. The beginning of part 1 is fairly atonal. This follows more of a key center. The beginning of part 2 follows mostly the same formula in that it's built out of runs, trills, and fanfare type figures. Your runs should be practiced slowly with a metronome to begin with and then worked up to tempo. The fanfare type figures should all be marcato, and then all the trills are fast trills, so make sure we're putting an appropriate density of notes behind each trill. First clarinet, watch out here. This is an 8th note sextuplet, not a 16th note sextuplet. Note here that first clarinet, second clarinet, and third clarinet will not all line up on this run. First clarinet, you've got 5 notes here. Second clarinet and third, you have 4 notes here. First and second clarinet, attack this sforzando, do not decrescendo going down into this mezzo forte. Attack the sforzando, and then subito mezzo forte at the 4/4 bar. There's a timpani roll here on those two 4/4 bars, and the piccolo solo begins at the 3/4 bar. If you're interested in how the beginning of this section works out, essentially from B to C here in part 2, I highly suggest you reference the condensed score video and score study video number 4, the themes part 2 video, as I discuss a little bit about the orchestration and how all that works. Essentially, this is a mixed meter chorale, and so it should be played very espressivo, very legato, even though I haven't marked every note legato. Letter C is essentially a recap of letter B, except it's transposed up by a half step. So if you'll notice, the previous section is in E minor for you, which would be concert D minor. Letter C is in concert E flat minor, which is your F minor. So mind your A flats and D flats, which in concert pitch would be concert G flat and concert C flat. And then most of the material is relatively the same. However, it is in that new key. So again, watch your axles. Letter E is a recap of the theme that's introduced at letter R in part 1 with the flute solo. However, like the transposition of the theme at letter C, this is also a transposed version of the theme that was presented in part 1. Notice that third clarinet top to VC, you have the melody here. And first and second clarinets, you have a descant or counter melody to that main melodic idea. So let's listen to it here. Notice that these end on 8th notes. These 8th notes don't need to be clipped. They just need to be shorter notes. Again, first clarinet, make sure you're counting out and subdividing the 7 and the 5 here. Second clarinet, same thing. Third clarinet, make sure that F sharp and E natural carry all the way through the measure here at bar number 46, 2 bars before letter F. The sequence at letter F is kind of just a total recapitulation of the chorale theme that we've been hearing all the way through movement 3. I do a much more thorough analysis of that theme in score study video number 4, so please go check that out if you're interested in that. The bar before G, you will hear a piccolo solo. The downbeat of G, you will hear a timpani stroke. And then if you watch the conductor video for the project, I will be cueing you into the 4/4 bar. So let's just listen to that real quickly. Then you'll be playing the chorale theme, which is the chorale theme that appeared at letter D in the first part, in part 1, in the first movement, except now it's in major. This is also the chorale that will appear at the end of the symphony. So again, very legato, espressivo, very singingly. Notice that letter H is just a complete copy and paste of the beginning of part 2. So all the same warnings and notes apply there. Letter J, poco minimoso, is mostly rest for all of you. At letter L, first clarinet, you are doubling flute 1 an octave lower. Second clarinet, I spelled crescendo wrong. Please forgive me. But it should say non-crescendo like it does in the third clarinet part. So even though those lines are ascending chromatically and you should feel the temptation to crescendo, do not. But then crescendo the second time to mezzo forte at the poco più mosso. 1 bar before M, molto ritard, crescendo. Second clarinets, this is a divisi. It's a little bit difficult to read. The top divisi has a dotted half note, then a quarter note. Lower divisi has half note, quarter note, quarter note. And then both parts do tie over into letter M. Again, at letter M, these are fast trills, so make sure we're putting an appropriate volume of notes through each trill. Trills also carry over bar lines when written. Third clarinet, you start this note without trilling and then begin trilling on the downbeat here of bar 118. This bring out applies to the phrase starting with the tied note and ending here at 119. It does not apply to the rest of this leading up to letter N. This fanfare figure here at letter N, first clarinet, bring out. Second clarinet, you have this fanfare figure, which I discuss in score study video number 3 with the second flutes. Again, these descending chromatic lines just follow the contour of the phrase. However, when we reach piano, pianissimo, lower dynamics, that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear you. That just means you're playing very quietly. Third clarinet, the sforzando here doesn't need to be super loud or super forceful, especially since the first and second clarinets and then the other woodwinds that are playing there are also at pianissimo. First clarinet, what's happening here is you are exchanging the end of that run with bass clarinet, since if you continued to descend chromatically, you would run out of range. So what happens there, if I can get to that point in the score, is that bass clarinet continues exactly where you left off and descends chromatically to finish that line out. There's a beautiful horn chorale here at letter O. At letter P, first clarinets, please ignore all of this 2 players and then add remaining, because there are only 2 of you, I believe. If there are 3, all 3 of you go ahead and play right here. I was envisioning a clarinet section much larger than the one we have. However, this piece still works perfectly fine with the clarinet section we have, which is actually a fairly standard size clarinet section. This is a fanfare type figure that gets reprised in the trumpets at letter R. If you'll listen to the piece, the chorale that happens at letter P is also the chorale that happens at letter Q. What you'll notice here at letter Q is second clarinet has a whole lot more runs than the first clarinet. And to that, you know, it's important that we all get to play runs sometimes. But also, first clarinet gets runs later in this section at letter R and beyond. Second clarinets, make sure you're subdividing well. Most of your runs are 6s and 3s. You do have this 1-5 here, so make sure you subdivide appropriately. First clarinet, you've got the melody. It's embellished a little bit, and it is fairly high, so make sure you're in tune. Again, count these sevens out, subdivide them, especially sevens that go into other tuplets. Again, at letter R, second clarinets, first clarinets, make sure you're in tune, especially when you're going up high. Second clarinets, make sure you're subdividing, especially from these sixes, sevens, and threes. And of course, these last couple of sevens. First clarinet, this final fanfare type figure, bring that out. Mind the double dotted 8th 32nd rhythm. It is different than a dotted 8th 16th. And then this is just a very loud, very long D major chord for you. It's a C major chord in concert pitch that closes the piece. Notice the legato marking on the 8th note at the very end. This is not a stinger on a Sousa march. This is an 8th note that should be held out for its full value. And that's the end of the analysis for all three clarinet parts. This video is a little bit longer than some of the others because I do have to cover all three clarinet parts. I hope this video is informative and helpful to you as you prepare your parts for recording for the project. If you have questions or comments on the analysis presented in this video, you can email at 4minutesvirtual@gmail.com. And if you have additional questions or spots you'd like to see analyzed in a future score study video, you can also email those to us at 4minutesvirtual@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.